She was lying on a hospital bed, bleeding out, alone, while her husband stood in the hallway handing divorce papers to a nurse and telling everyone those babies were not his. But here is what Cole Maddox did not know. While he was busy destroying his wife, a doctor had already signed his name on every legal form for those 3 newborns. The man who abandoned his children had just been replaced, and he did not even see it coming. The forged medical records, the assistant who orchestrated everything, the father who vanished 15 years ago and suddenly reappeared demanding access to those babies. None of it was random. It was a web of betrayal so perfectly constructed that when it finally unraveled, it did not just expose one liar, it destroyed all of them. Harper Sullivan was a quiet nurse who spent her life making herself invisible just to survive. She married a man who loved her light only long enough to figure out how to extinguish it. She carried triplets through loneliness, cruelty, and lies. And when the world tried to take everything from her, including her newborn children from a hospital ward in the middle of the night, she did something no one expected. She fought back, and she won. This story will remind you of one powerful truth. The people who try to break you are always afraid of what you will become when you stop bending. Stay until the end, because the moment Harper walks into that boardroom will change how you see strength forever. If stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever had to fight for something everyone told you to give up on? And if someone in your life needs to hear this today, share it. Now let us begin.
Harper Sullivan had spent her life trying to be invisible, believing for a long time that it was the safest way to exist. Growing up in a run-down corner of Boston, she learned young that hopes were delicate and easily shattered, ridiculed, or stolen. Her mother pulled double shifts at a diner. Her father vanished into a haze of alcohol and broken promises. So Harper learned to be the quiet girl, the one who made no waves, hoping the world might just leave her alone. But quiet people often have the loudest storms inside. The moment she started nursing school, Harper discovered her purpose. She was never the top student, but she was the one who would hold a preemie's tiny hand as it learned to breathe. She was the one who soothed new mothers, convinced their lives were over. She was the one who stayed late, not for the extra pay, but because the image of an infant alone in an incubator was more than she could stand. A nurse's salary was modest, but for the first time, Harper felt like she meant something. That is when she met Cole Maddox. He strode into the hospital lobby on a snowy night, tall and angular, with a self-assurance that suggested he owned the very ground he walked on. He was visiting a sick coworker, but his gaze kept finding Harper. Her red hair was in a messy bun, her scrubs were wrinkled from a 16-hour day, and her smile was exhausted but deeply real. Cole claimed she had a rare kind of light. Harper wanted to believe him, so she did. She had yet to learn that some men are drawn to a flame only so they can snuff it out. Their first year of marriage was a fairy tale. They ate simple meals in their small Queens apartment, watched movies on the couch, and talked for hours about their future. Harper believed she had finally come home. Then Cole started climbing the corporate ladder. He stepped into Manhattan finance, a world where perception was reality and loyalty was a liability. The man who once cherished her started to see her as an obstacle. He complained about her long hours. He said she lacked the polish for his company parties. He insisted a nurse's income was incompatible with his new life. And then he told her she was no longer enough. Yet Harper held on, especially after the miracle happened. Following years of disappointment and quiet nights weeping in the bathroom, where Cole could not hear, she discovered she was pregnant. Not with one child or even 2, but 3 triplets. Her hands quaked as she looked at the ultrasound photo, a wonder 3 times over. She pictured Cole sweeping her up in a joyful hug, crying with her, assuring her they could handle anything together. Instead, he just stared blankly at the image, then uttered the 5 words that would torment her for her entire pregnancy. "That's impossible, Harper. I am sterile." He produced a medical document, one she had no idea was fake. He hurled accusations. He talked about divorce. He disappeared for 3 days. But Harper would not break. These babies were hers, a chance to build the family she never had, to create a new story. She endured morning sickness, a tiny apartment, extra shifts, and lonely nights, whispering to each of the 3 heartbeats, "I am here. I will never leave you." She had no clue that the man she loved was waiting to deliver the most vicious betrayal the second they were born, and she was completely unaware that someone else was about to enter the picture and change the course of her entire life. New York City had a talent for chewing up people with gentle hearts and modest dreams. Harper Sullivan knew this truth long before the triplets, the lies, and the moment her life imploded under the harsh glare of operating room lights. Her home was a small walk-up in Astoria, Queens, the type of place where winter drafts snuck through the window casings and the summer humidity stuck to the walls. The kitchen could barely contain a stove, and the bedroom was not much larger than a walk-in closet. But for Harper, it was a safe haven, a place she dreamed of bringing her babies home to, imagining herself rocking them in the little wooden crib she had found at a second-hand shop. On Steinway Street, each morning, she took the N train to Manhattan for her job at St. Victoria Medical Center, a huge hospital tucked between shiny skyscrapers on East 68th Street. It was not a glamorous life, but it had a rhythm, and it gave her a mission. The gleaming floors, the steady beeping of machines, the rattle of supply carts in the halls, it all confirmed she had a place in the world, even when her own home felt empty. Cole, however, occupied a completely different New York. His life unfolded in glass-walled boardrooms on the 42nd floor of a Park Avenue skyscraper, where men in expensive suits finalized million-dollar deals over lunch and toasted with wines that cost more than Harper's rent. His peers drove black sedans and wore watches that glittered in fancy restaurants. He blended in seamlessly, wearing his ambition like a perfectly tailored suit. Harper never fit into that world. The further Cole ventured into that life, the more she vanished from his view. Their life together started in a humble apartment and was ending in a penthouse she almost never saw. Cole stopped inviting her to work functions, saying she always looked worn out and that a nurse just did not fit the corporate image. He came home late, and then he stopped coming home at all. Once he dropped the pretense, their 2 worlds were officially separate. His was a world of polished stone, and hers was a world of scuffed linoleum. The breaking point came the night Harper's labor started early. Snow lashed the windows as she gasped through powerful contractions. She called Cole first, 3 separate times, but got no answer. He was at a company gala at the Plaza Hotel, where chandeliers dripped with crystal, and his assistant, Verena, remained close by his side. Harper hailed a cab by herself, her knuckles white as she gripped the seat through waves of pain. The city became a smear of lights past the window. Fifth Avenue, Central Park, the flashing strobes of passing ambulances. She arrived at the hospital drenched in sweat and trembling with fear. Inside St. Victoria's maternity ward, the air was thick with controlled chaos. Doctors hurried past. Monitors beeped insistently. Nurses shared updates in low tones while tracking fetal heartbeats. Harper's own vision tunneled as the contractions intensified. Her blood pressure dropped, and the world faded to a dull roar. Cole showed up only after it was far too late to fake any concern. He did not hold her hand. He did not ask how she was. He just stood there, gave her the divorce papers, and declared the babies were not his. But the hospital had a final shock in store for him, one he could not have seen coming, because another man had already claimed the role he had just renounced, and that man's name was already on all the official forms. If Harper was the quiet center, keeping her own universe from flying apart, Cole Maddox was the hurricane sent to destroy it. He was not always like this, or at least he did not seem to be. But immense power tends to strip away a person's disguise, and Cole's true self was a cruel thing dressed in a very expensive suit. Cole was raised in a rich New England town where your reputation was worth more than your character. His father, a brutal and calculating man in finance, taught him that feelings were a liability, and any weakness was a sickness to be cured. Cole quickly mastered the art of charm, the skill of manipulation, and the strategy of winning by crushing others without leaving a trace. By the time he got to Manhattan, Cole was an expert at looking good while being rotten inside. But Harper never saw the decay until it was far too late. His success didn't just make him distant. He deliberately dismantled their life together. He traded love for judgment, then silence, and finally a coldness he called logic. He made her the reason for his stress, his dissatisfaction, and his refusal to start the family she craved. But Verena Lowe was the true poison. She came into his life with a smile that seemed too perfect to be real. As his assistant, she handled his schedule and his coffee. But under that quiet exterior was a vicious ambition. Verena wasn't after a career. She wanted to build an empire on the ashes of someone else's life. She targeted Cole like a predator isolating its prey, with quiet patience and a steady gaze. The first time they met, Verena's handshake was brief and icy, her eyes dismissing Harper's simple sweater with a flicker of contempt. "You must be Harper," she'd said. "Cole mentions you." Harper had no way of knowing that Verena had already illegally obtained Cole's medical files. She knew about his diagnosis of extremely low fertility. She knew it was the perfect weapon, and she used it. She would find Cole alone at the office, offering a shoulder to cry on, boosting his ego, and eventually offering herself. She planted the idea in his head. "Having triplets, with your medical issue, Cole, you really need to consider what that implies." Cole believed her because he wanted to, because his pride fed on doubt more than on love. After that, Verena constructed her lie with absolute precision. She forged his fertility records. She pushed him to pull away from Harper. She knew just when to act like the victim, the confidant, or the lover. By Harper's third trimester, Verena was the ghost behind every cruel thing Cole said. And there in the hospital, she stood next to him, her hand on his arm, as if she belonged there. When the nurse asked if he was the father, Verena's lips formed a smug smile, but neither of them knew that their perfect plan was about to be intercepted by fate. A day of reckoning was here. It started with a signature and a doctored report. It would shatter their conspiracy beyond repair. Just then, an unexpected figure appeared down the hall. The expression on his face made it clear their lies had found the one person they never should have crossed. The hallway outside the delivery room had fallen silent, a heavy quiet that promised a coming storm. Nurses hovered nearby, trying to seem busy while staring at Harper's door. A disaster was unfolding, and everyone could feel it. Cole Maddox stood stiffly, his jaw tight, clutching divorce papers like a trophy instead of the remnants of a life he had just torched. Verena was right beside him, her fingers brushing his arm every few moments, staking a claim that was never hers to make. Every move she made was carefully calculated, from the tilt of her head to the whisper of concern. She was auditioning for the role of the new woman before the old one had even delivered their children. Then the nurse asked the question, "Sir, are you the father?" It was a standard procedure, but the words cut through the tension. Cole froze, looking at Verena, who smiled faintly, expecting his denial. But the real shock came from the clipboard the nurse was holding. Our files show Dr. Rowan Hale as the emergency guardian and the legal signatory for all three of the infants. We just need to confirm this for the hospital's final paperwork. All the color vanished from Cole's face. "What did you just say?" His voice was thin and cracked. Verena stepped in immediately. "That has to be a mistake. Dr. Hale? Cole is the father. His name belongs on those forms." The nurse checked her notes. "Sir, you signed a refusal form before the delivery. It allows the hospital to appoint a guardian in a medical crisis." Cole stared, remembering the papers Verena had him sign in a rush, calling them routine waivers. But Verena wasn't confused. She was terrified. "Harper never would have asked him," Verena snapped. "She barely knows the man." Whispers started to spread. Everyone knew Dr. Rowan Hale. He was brilliant, dedicated, and the doctor you wanted when things went wrong. His involvement meant Harper's situation was dire. The door at the end of the corridor opened. Rowan walked out, looking tired but determined, his scrubs showing the signs of a long night saving a life. His hair was a mess, and his usually kind eyes were sharp with a controlled rage. He walked right past everyone and stopped in front of Cole. "You weren't there," Rowan said, his quiet voice hitting harder than a shout. "She was crashing. The babies were crashing. Somebody had to make a choice." Cole scoffed, trying to regain control. "You had no right." Rowan moved closer, his voice dropping. "And you had no desire to be there. You abandoned her. You abandoned them." A wave of shock went through the onlookers. People started whispering as phones came up to record the scene. For the first time, Cole felt his perfect reputation crumbling in public. Rowan went on, "Harper is alive because she is a fighter. Your children are alive because this hospital did its job. And you—" He never finished. An alarm shrieked from inside Harper's room. Her heart monitor was screaming. Cole whipped around toward the door. Rowan was already running. The second they went through that door, every lie was about to be exposed. Harper felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness. The sounds around her were a muffled buzz, and the lights were just blurry streaks. She knew she was in deep trouble long before anyone had to say it. A crushing weight pressed down on her chest. Her arms and legs started to tingle, then felt like they weren't there at all. Through the fog, she remembered Cole's voice, cold and final, walking away when she was at her most vulnerable. That was the moment she truly broke. It wasn't a loud collapse, but a silent shattering. A single tear tracked down her face, unseen by the busy staff. It wasn't a tear of pain, but of absolute despair, the kind that steals your breath and leaves an emptiness that can't be filled. "Her pressure is dropping," someone yelled. "We need to get her stable now." Harper tried to speak, to tell them she wasn't ready to leave. Her baby's behind. But her lips were frozen. No sound would come out. Instead, memories flooded her mind. Her mom's gentle hands, a promise she made as a child to be a better parent. The joy of seeing a positive pregnancy test, a miracle she never expected. A flash of Cole's old smile, from before he became a stranger. Then, a darker thought surfaced. The memory of Cole whispering, "They're not mine," while she lay helpless. Those words tightened around her heart like a vice. Her breathing stopped. The alarm screamed. "She's crashing." A mask came down over her face. Hands held her head steady. Someone yelled for medicine. Someone else yelled for Rowan. Through her blurry sight, she saw him arrive at her side. He was like a controlled storm, his eyes taking in everything at once, his focus absolute. "Harper, stay with me," he said, leaning in close. His voice was strong and reassuring. "You are okay. You are safe. I have you." No one had said those words to her in such a long time. Another tear escaped. "Rowan, her BP is falling fast. Get another line in her," he ordered. "We are not going to lose her." He found her hand and squeezed it, firm and confident, as if he could hold her here with his will alone. "Think about your babies," Rowan said gently. "They are waiting for you. Do you hear me? They need their mom." Her heart skipped, went flat for one terrifying second, then started again, a weak but steady rhythm. Rowan let out a sharp breath. "That's it. Fight. Don't you dare give up." Harper's world began to fade, the colors bleeding into gray. The world was melting around her. Voices were distorted, and her thoughts blinked out one by one, like lights in a long hallway. Just as the darkness closed in, a voice cut through the fog, sharp and angry. It was a voice she never thought she would hear. "Her babies are registered to who?" it demanded, laced with disbelief. Then she heard Verina's shaky reply. "They said a Rowan Hale signed for them." Harper's heart seized. The world went black before she heard anything else. For what felt like ages, she drifted through a haze of muffled sounds and pulsing lights. When her eyes finally fluttered open, the steady beep of a monitor was the first thing she noticed. The room was cool and dim, and her breathing felt even for the first time in days. But she could tell she was not alone. Rowan Hale sat in a chair next to her bed, his body slumped with exhaustion. His scrubs were rumpled, and his hair looked like he had run his hands through it 1,000 times. But when he looked up, his eyes held a surprising warmth. "You gave us quite a scare," he said, his voice low. Harper's throat was on fire when she tried to answer. Rowan gently helped her sip some water, his touch more careful than any she had felt in years. When she could speak, her voice was a rasp. "Are my babies okay?" "They're fighters," Rowan assured her. "Doing better than we hoped. They are stable." A wave of relief washed over her, strong enough to bring fresh tears, but the peace was fleeting. A shadow of pain crossed his face, a look he couldn't quite conceal. "Harper, we need to discuss something." Her pulse began to race. "What was it? What did I hear right before I fainted?" Rowan sighed deeply. "The hospital needed a legal guardian on file for the emergency. Cole was not here, and you were unconscious. Hospital rules meant someone had to sign." "So you did?" Harper asked faintly. "As the doctor on duty, yes, I had to." He paused, then said, "For now, the babies have the last name Hale." Harper's breath hitched. Her children were legally tied to a practical stranger. It felt wrong. "That is not the biggest problem," Rowan said, lowering his voice. "Someone tampered with Cole's fertility reports." Harper stared. "Tampered? What does that mean?" Rowan stood and picked up a chart from a nearby table. He moved, with slow deliberation. His medical records were changed, lab results were falsified, and a false diagnosis was created. He met her gaze. "Cole can have children. He always could have." The room seemed to spin. "But the papers he showed me," Harper stammered. "He told me he couldn't." "He thought they were authentic," Rowan explained. But another person gained access to his medical profile. Someone who knew just what to fake. The silent accusation filled the room. "Verina," Harper breathed, a chill spreading through her. Rowan went on. "There is more. Right after you collapsed, the NICU ran genetic tests to find an emergency blood match." Harper's heart pounded. "And what did the tests show?" Rowan paused just long enough for dread to sink in. "The triplets are a 99% match to Cole. They are his biological children." Breath caught in her throat. The months of accusations, the arguments, the divorce papers he had thrown at her were all built on a complete fabrication, a lie designed to make Cole leave her, a lie that destroyed her world. Why? Harper whispered, her voice shaking. Who would do such a thing? Rowan's expression hardened. There is something you should know about Verena Lowe. She was not only Cole's analyst, she was in your nursing program years back. Harper's eyes shot open as a memory surfaced. She recalled Verena's icy handshake and the superior way she always looked at her. She tried to ruin you before, Rowan told her. She messed with your scholarship applications and letters of recommendation. She has targeted you in the past. The rhythm in her ears was deafening. This was no coincidence. It was a planned, personal attack. Before she could process it all, there was a knock on the door. A nurse leaned in, looking panicked. Dr. Hale, we have an issue at the NICU. Someone is attempting to get into the Triplets unit. Rowan's face turned to stone. Who is it? He asked sharply. The nurse looked terrified. It is Cole and Verena. A deep cold settled in Harper's bones. She knew then that the nightmare was far from over. It was just getting started. The next morning, it felt like she had woken up in a different reality. Harper was sitting up in bed, the fear and weakness gone. A profound change had occurred within her. Perhaps it was the truth finally coming to light, or the fact she had almost died. Or maybe she finally understood she had made herself small for a man who could not love what he could not own. Whatever it was, she was not the same woman who had pleaded with Cole to believe her. A gentle knock came from the door. A nurse named Priya came in, smiling, rolling a small mirror toward the bed. You wanted this, she said softly. Are you ready, Ma? Yes, Harper said quietly. I have to see. Priya set the mirror in front of her. Harper hesitated, preparing herself for the sight of a pale, exhausted woman with dark circles under her eyes. But when she looked, she was stunned. She did not look broken. She looked resilient. There was color in her cheeks. Her messy hair framed her face with a strange softness. And her eyes, while weary, were filled with a new strength. For the first time in a very long time, she recognized her mother's fighting spirit in her reflection. Let me help you, Priya offered kindly. They worked together, braiding her hair and smoothing her hospital gown, gently washing the tear stains from her cheeks. It was a small act, but it felt like the first step in putting herself back together. When Rowan came in later, he stopped short in the doorway. You look... He seemed at a loss for words, a flicker of surprise on his face. You look strong. Harper offered a faint smile. I feel like I'm finally awake. Rowan moved a chair closer, his expression growing serious. We've increased security around the NICU. Cole and Verena cannot get to the babies anymore unless it is authorized. The fear was a tiny spark that she quickly extinguished. Good, she stated. I am through with them running my life. Rowan watched her for a second. You sound different. I am different. She sat up straighter, looking at the sunlight pouring onto the floor. I spent so long thinking my only job was to fix our marriage, to be what he wanted. But I am not meant to live in his shadow. I am not meant to live in anyone's. A gentle look came over Rowan's face. You never were. Harper's voice grew stronger. The day I leave here, I want lawyers, DNA tests, and all the proof of those fake medical records. I am done being pushed around. If Cole is looking for a fight, he has found one, but I will not be a victim this time. Rowan gave a slow nod, his face full of admiration. I will support you in any way I can. But Harper gently shook her head. Thank you, but this is something I have to handle myself. Yet Rowan was not done helping. He gave her a thick, sealed envelope. What is in here? Something you are going to need, he answered. Inside was a business card for one of the top family law firms in the city, the type of lawyers only the super rich could hire. The name itself felt powerful, like a shield. Harper's throat went dry. Rowan, there is no way I can afford this. Yes, you can, he said, cutting her off. I have already paid the retainer. She just stared at him, completely shocked. Why would you do this for me? Rowan paused. His jaw worked as he struggled with words he was not yet ready to say. Because you should have had someone in your corner a long time ago, and you deserve a life where you do not always have to fight just to keep your head above water. She was breathless. But before she could find her voice, she heard a familiar, chilling sound from the hall. It was Cole, and he had company. The next voice she heard belonged to Verena. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Maddox Financial was completely silent. The huge windows showed off the Manhattan skyline, filling the room with a cold, unforgiving light. It was supposed to be a normal business morning. Analysts would be passing around reports, and partners would be looking at numbers. Instead, the room was packed. Every chair was taken, every gaze was locked, and the air was thick with tension. Because Harper Sullivan was there to dismantle the man who had tried to ruin her. She was not by herself. Rowan Hale was at her side, along with two lawyers who looked like they had never lost a case. Harper was no longer the exhausted woman in a hospital bed. She wore a deep green dress that made her hair look like fire. Her back was straight and her head was held high. She was not the weak person Cole had thrown away. She was the mother of his 3 children, and she was the woman he was certain he had broken. Cole was at the other end of the long table, and his usual confidence was beginning to crumble. Verena stood next to him in a power suit, acting like she was meant to be there, but her nervous eyes kept flicking from the lawyers to Rowan and then to Harper. Can we just finish this? Cole snapped, trying to sound like he was in charge. You have no right to come into my company. Rowan just lifted an eyebrow. Actually, we do. We have an invitation. He slid a folder across the polished table. From your board of directors. A shocked murmur went through the room. The lead board member, a sharp woman with silver hair, spoke up. Mr. Maddox, your wife has brought forward some very disturbing claims. We are talking about forged medical documents, emotional abuse, and an unauthorized attempt to enter the NICU. Cole's face flushed with anger. That is ridiculous. She is making it all up. She is... Model, that's enough. Harper's voice was quiet but final. She pushed a stack of papers across the table. Here are the actual fertility reports. And this, she added a second folder, proves who faked them. Verena's face lost all color. The lawyers showed large screenshots of login records, IP addresses, and alerts, all tracing back to Verena Lowe. No, Verena whispered. That's not possible. I couldn't have. Rowan stepped forward, his look intense. You used but stolen credentials to get into a private medical database. You faked lab results. You tricked Cole into ending his marriage and then tried to get into the NICU. The board gasped. Cole reeled back, stunned. You did this? Verena yelled. You were meant to leave her. You always chose her, even when you didn't see it. I needed to make you understand. That wasn't understanding, Harper said calmly. That was obsession. Verena lunged, her trembling finger aimed at Harper. You aren't worthy of him. He was never for you. He is mine. At that moment, security, called by Rowan, burst in. Verena shrieked as they grabbed her. Cole just stood there. As she was pulled out, she screamed, This isn't finished. All of you will pay for this. Silence filled the room. Cole looked around, his eyes wide with fear. You can't believe her over me. She wants to destroy me. But Harper was already opening the last file, which held the power to ruin what was left of his name. Inside was the DNA, proof that Cole had insisted was impossible. "You are the father, Cole," Harper said gently, "and you left your children." The room went completely still. Cole swayed on his feet. His entire world was crumbling. Rowan placed a hand on Harper's shoulder. "Harper," he murmured, "you've done what you needed to do." But she was not finished. She took a step toward Cole, her eyes fixed on his, her voice full of trembling strength. "This is just the start." Just then, the chairman called for a vote that would determine Cole's entire future. The vote was fast, but the outcome was monumental. Cole Maddox stood in the middle of the room as the same people who once called him a genius raised their hands, one after another, to remove him as CEO. There was no hesitation, no pity, just a cold quiet and the noise of a world falling apart. Cole's throat felt tight as he tried to absorb the shock. "You can't. I built this company from nothing." The chairwoman shut the folder before her. "And you nearly tore it all down. Your irresponsible conduct, ethical violations, and negligence have harmed your employees and your own family. We cannot give this company to a man who puts his ego before his duty." Harper watched it all happen without a word. She didn't look pleased. She didn't even smile. She was calm and motionless, like a soldier surveying a quiet battlefield, feeling resolute, not victorious. Cole spun toward her, his eyes wild. "You did this. You turned them all against me." "No," Harper replied softly. "You did that entirely on your own." He scanned the room, desperately looking for a friendly face. But Verena was not there. His associates returned his gaze with emotionless expressions. He had no one left. Security moved closer. Cole took a step back. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my company, my life's work." The guards each took one of his arms, steering him to the exit. He offered no real resistance. His legs grew weak, and his shoulders drooped. The weight of his own actions, which he had avoided for so long, had finally become too much to bear. Before he vanished from sight, he looked back at Harper. He had a fearful look in his eyes that she once knew, but would never feel again. Once he was gone, a collective sigh of relief filled the room. The board looked at Harper with quiet nods of respect, not pity. She had been through so much, yet found the courage to face them all. Rowan moved nearer, his voice low for her ears. "Alone." "It's finished, Harper." But she shook her head. "No, not quite." He watched her. "What else is there?" Harper lifted her head. "My children need legal protection and full custody. Cole will do something desperate when he figures out what he has lost." Rowan nodded. "Then we get ready." As they left the boardroom, the lobby was overrun with reporters. Cameras flashed brightly, and microphones were pushed in their direction. The news was already racing across the city. A disgraced CEO ousted over a paternity scandal and fraud. Harper raised a hand to cover her face, but Rowan moved to stand in front of her, shielding her with his own body. "It's all right," he whispered. "I have you." His steady, calming presence was a great comfort. For the first time, in what felt like forever, Harper understood she was not alone in this fight. Outside, the cold winter wind blew, but she felt a warmth deep inside, as if a huge burden was finally gone. She had walked through fire and had come out stronger. Yet, one thought troubled her. "Do you believe Cole will just go away?" she asked. Rowan let out a breath. "Men like him don't go away. They get even." Harper swallowed nervously. The city lights became a blur as snow began to fall. "Then I must be prepared." Rowan came closer, looking into her eyes. "You won today, and you'll win the next battle too." I'll make sure of that. But as Harper started to speak, Rowan's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his face tensed. "What is it?" she asked, her heart beating faster. Rowan looked up, his eyes serious, his voice tense. "The hospital just called." Harper stood, frozen. "They told me someone tried to get into the NICU again, but it wasn't Cole or Verena this time." The hospital felt colder than ever, as if the building itself knew something was wrong. Harper's heart hammered in her chest as she walked quickly with Rowan, their steps echoing on the floor. Her hands were damp, and her throat was tight. She had faced deceit, public shame, and almost died, but nothing scared her more than her 3 tiny babies in their incubators. "What is happening?" she asked, out of breath from trying to keep up. "There was an unauthorized attempt to enter the NICU," Rowan said sharply. "The person ran when a nurse spotted them." Harper's stomach clenched. "Ran? So they made it inside?" "No," Rowan replied, "but they were close enough to alarm the staff." They came around the corner to the NICU. Security guards were stationed by the doors, looking very tense. One approached Rowan. "Dr. Hale, we've looked at the security video," he said. "The intruder had a visitor pass, but it wasn't issued today." "How did they get one?" Harper asked in a low voice. The guard paused. "We're trying to figure that out, but there's another problem." He looked at Harper. "Ma'am, the pass was issued in your name." Harper felt like she might fall over. "Mine? I never got a pass. I've been in the maternity ward this whole time." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Someone's using her identity." A cold fear washed over Harper. Who could be doing this? Cole was angry, but sneaking into a NICU was a huge risk, even for him, especially if it could harm his own kids. And Verena was in jail. Who could it be? Rowan gently put a hand on her arm. "Come on, let's go see the babies." They went into the NICU, where the quiet, steady beeping of monitors filled the air. The warm, softly lit room felt like a safe haven, where new life fought to survive. Harper went straight to the incubators holding her triplets, who were small and perfect, attached to monitors, but breathing on their own. Noah, Grace, and Oliver were her whole world. She touched the glass softly, her voice just a whisper. "Mommy is here." "They are fine," Rowan said quietly. "Nothing has been disturbed." Harper breathed out, relieved, but the feeling was fragile. "Someone is targeting them," she said, her voice shaking. "Why? What do they want?" Rowan did not reply at first. He signaled for the nurse to give them some privacy. When the room was empty, he looked at Harper with a new gravity in his eyes. "There is a chance," he said carefully, "that this is not about Cole at all." Harper frowned. Who else would want to hurt them? Rowan put his hands in his pockets, a sign that he was choosing his words with care. The pass was not the only strange detail. The intruder didn't go for the triplets right away. They went to a supply closet. "The closet?" Harper echoed. "For what?" "That is where we keep the blood type information and transfusion materials." Rowan met her eyes. Whoever it was wasn't trying to hurt them. They were trying to confirm their DNA. Harper felt the color drain from her face. Why would anyone do that? Rowan's silence said everything. Just then a nurse hurried into the unit, out of breath. "Dr. Hale, you have to look at this." She held out a tablet. Security had managed to enhance the video footage. A hood covered part of the intruder's face, but not all of it. Harper's blood ran cold. She recognized him instantly, a face she had not seen in almost 15 years. It was her estranged father, the man who had abandoned her, and now he was here, trying to get to her babies. For a second, Harper forgot how to breathe. The grainy image on the screen, though distorted, was unmistakably him, and it left a gaping hole in her chest. That aged but familiar face dragged her back into a past she had desperately tried to forget. Her father, Patrick Sullivan, the man who disappeared without a word, leaving her and her mother to struggle with unpaid bills and shattered promises. She had not spoken to him since she was 13. "What is he doing here?" Harper breathed. "Why now?" Rowan carefully took the tablet from her shaking hands. "We are not sure yet, but security did flag his visitor pass. It seems he used stolen credentials to get in." A wave of nausea hit her. The memory of all those nights she spent crying alone came rushing back. The eviction notices, her mother working 3 jobs to survive, and the heavy guilt she felt when her mother got sick. Life had taught Harper a hard lesson. Sometimes the ones meant to protect you are the first ones to leave. She never imagined seeing him again, and certainly not like this. Rowan moved closer. "Harper, when was the last time you saw him?" 15 years ago, she whispered. "He just left. No calls, no money, not even a word when Mom got sick. I honestly thought he was dead." Her voice broke on the final word. Rowan's face softened. Maybe he is in some kind of trouble. Maybe something happened. Harper shook her head. He was never in enough trouble to come back for me, and he was not there for her, either. She looked at her newborns in their incubators, these tiny babies she would die to protect. The idea of her father, a man who failed his own child, trying to get near them, made her feel sick. The NICU nurse lingered close by, hesitating. "There is something else. We checked the admission records from this morning. Someone with your father's name asked for a meeting with genetic specialists." Harper's eyes went wide. "Genetics? Why?" Rowan and the nurse shared a serious, knowing glance. "Harper, it is possible your father is sick." Harper's breath caught in her throat. "Sick?" "Some genetic conditions require treatment from close relatives," Rowan explained gently. "In some cases, from grandchildren." The world seemed to spin around her. "No," she whispered. "He can't just reappear and start making demands. He will not use my children as some kind of cure." Rowan put a steady hand on her shoulder. "You do not have to decide anything right now, but you need to know what is happening before he tries to contact you again." Harper forced herself to swallow. Her heart pounded in her chest. She could feel old scars tearing open, wounds she believed had healed years ago. "But why steal a badge?" she murmured. "Why sneak in instead of just coming to talk to me?" The nurse lowered her voice. "Because the hospital turned down his request. He had no authorization to get information about you or the babies. He tried to get in anyway." A sickening mix of fear and rage coiled in her stomach. Her father was always a wild card, charming one minute and vicious the next if he did not get his way. But this was different. This was planned. Rowan paused before he spoke again. "There's one more thing you need to see." Security found this, dropped near the NICU entrance. He took a folded paper from his pocket and gave it to her. Her breath hitched as she slowly unfolded it, recognizing the messy, sharp, and painfully familiar handwriting. It read, "Harper, I need your children. Do not make this difficult." Her hands trembled, and the room began to tilt. Rowan caught the paper just as it slipped from her fingers. This was not about making amends. This was about taking what he wanted. Before Rowan could react, a new alarm shrieked through the unit, a NICU alert that chilled her to the bone. A nurse burst into the hallway. "Dr. Hale, a monitor on one of the babies is spiking. We need you right away." Harper's heart froze. When she ran into the NICU, she knew the nightmare was far from over. It was escalating. The NICU was pulsing with frantic energy the moment Harper rushed inside. Flashing alarms cast a red glow across the room, like a dire warning. Nurses moved with practiced speed, gathered around the incubator of her smallest baby, Oliver, her most vulnerable child. His monitor was alarming. His oxygen levels had dipped just enough to cause a scare. Harper put a hand to her chest, struggling for air. "What is going on?" A nurse checked the ventilator. "His numbers are getting better, but the incubator's settings were changed. The temperature was altered." Harper went still. "Altered? On purpose?" "This was not a system malfunction," the nurse said grimly. "Someone did this manually." Tears of terror blurred her sight. First her father, and now this. Someone had been willing to endanger her newborn. Then Rowan charged into the unit, his face set with fierce determination. He went directly to Oliver's side, scanning the charts, adjusting the settings, and giving calm, firm orders. "Run a complete diagnostic. I want every single change time-stamped," he said, "and lock all access points. Nobody comes within 10 feet of these babies without triple verification." His authority calmed the room, and for a second, Harper felt the world stop shaking. But when Rowan finally looked at her, she saw a sharp, contained anger in his eyes. "Harper," he said in a low voice, "your father did not do this." She swallowed. "How do you know?" Rowan held up a small object in a plastic evidence bag. It was a security badge, but it did not belong to her father, and it was not Cole's either. "This was found under the incubator," Rowan said. "It is a duplicate access card for hospital staff." Harper's gut clenched. "Whose is it?" Rowan paused just long enough to make her feel weak. "It belongs to a technician on the night shift, someone who left his shift early this evening." Harper frowned. "But why would he do that?" "Because someone paid him," Rowan stated plainly. "And we need to find out who before she could respond." The NICU doors flew open, and a security supervisor rushed inside. "Dr. Hale, we have the technician in custody," he said. "He claims he meant no harm, that he was just doing a job." Harper's pulse hammered. "What job?" The supervisor glanced between Harper and Rowan, hesitant to say more. Rowan gave him a nod to go on. "He said a woman hired him, offered him cash to create a small scare. It was to distract the mother long enough for someone else to get near the infants. He said she called it a family matter." A cold dread washed over Harper. "A woman?" Rowan's posture became rigid. "Describe her." He said she was in her 30s, tall with dark red hair and an expensive coat. Harper shook her head. "No, it cannot be. Verena is already—" But Rowan was ahead of her, his expression grim. "It is not Verena." A chill ran through Harper. She only knew one other woman with hair like that. Her breathing hitched. "My father's second wife, Elena." Rowan's eyes grew wide as the pieces suddenly clicked together. "You mentioned she never cared for you." "That does not even begin to cover it," Harper whispered. "She always blamed me for my father leaving. She claimed I destroyed his life, and now she thinks my babies can save his." Before Rowan could respond, the NICU intercom buzzed. "Dr. Hale, please report to the main entrance immediately." Rowan shared a tense look with Harper. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not speak to anybody." Harper nodded, gripping the incubator rail like an anchor. As Rowan strode out, a guard hurried in, out of breath. "Ma'am," he said urgently, "you need to come with me. Someone is demanding to see you." Harper's heart slammed against her ribs. "Who?" The guard swallowed. "A woman with red hair. And she refuses to leave until she gets the babies." Harper followed the security guard down the long hall, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her palms were sweating, her breathing uneven. She had faced Cole, she had faced Verena, and she had faced the ghost of her father's betrayal. But the woman waiting for her now, Elena Sullivan, was a different kind of threat, a quiet poison that smiled while causing pain. When they got to the main entrance, Harper froze. Elena stood in the middle of the lobby, as if she owned the hospital. Her tall frame was wrapped in a burgundy cashmere coat. Her red hair fell in perfect waves, and her face was a cold mask of superiority. People moved out of her way without even knowing why. She projected an aura of power, but it was not real power. It was just entitlement, sharpened by years of bitterness. The moment Elena saw Harper, her lips curved into a cruel, thin smile. "Well," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "the prodigal daughter returns." Harper swallowed hard. "What are you doing here, Elena?" Elena took a step closer, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "I am here for what should have been ours a long time ago." Harper stiffened. "My children are not yours. They are not my father's. They are mine." Elena's cold smile did not waver. "Patrick is dying." The words hit Harper like a punch to the chest. Elena continued. "He needs a genetic match for a stem cell treatment, something only a close blood relative can provide." "And you want to use my babies," Harper said, her voice raw. "You want to take from them the same way he took everything from me." Elena's eyes hardened. "Your father gave your life. He deserves your help." "Help him?" Harper's voice was trembling with rage. "He walked out on us. He left Mom to fend for herself. He was gone when she was dying. He was gone when I had to drop out of college. He never even said goodbye." "For heaven's sake, Harper," Elena snapped back. "Just get over the past. This is about more than your hurt feelings." "No," Harper answered quietly, her anger now cold and solid. "This is entirely about my feelings, my boundaries, and my kids, and you will stay away from them." For the first time, Elena's composure began to fray. "Do you really think you can stop me?" she hissed. "Do you think your doctor friend can save you? I have attorneys. I have wealth. And you?" She scanned Harper from head to toe. "You've always been fragile." Harper stood her ground. "Fragile people do not endure what I have endured." Elena's confidence faltered for a moment. Before she could find a response, Rowan materialized behind Harper, his presence a fortress of steel. He moved to her side in silence, his eyes fixed on Elena with a cold fury he rarely ever showed. "You need to leave this hospital," Rowan said, in a low, even voice. "You will not contact Harper again, and you will stay away from her children." Elena let out a sharp, cold laugh. "And just who are you to tell me what to do?" Rowan took a document from his jacket and gave it to the security guard standing nearby. "This is an immediate, temporary order of protection." The smug look on Elena's face finally disappeared. "You can't do this," she sputtered. "I just did," Rowan stated, but Elena was far from giving up. Not even close. Her eyes held a darker, more menacing glint. "You think this is the end?" she whispered. "Harper will come around eventually. She'll have to. And when that happens..." Rowan took a step closer, his voice like a shard of ice. "Get out." The security team moved forward. Elena shot them a hateful look, then turned her poisonous glare on Harper, promising a world of pain to come, before spinning around and marching out of the hospital. Harper finally let out a shaky breath. Rowan put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's done," he said softly, but Harper kept watching the revolving doors, where Elena had vanished. She knew, deep down, something that Rowan did not. Elena never retreated without a strategy, and she never struck just once. The following morning, Harper was in a conference room with polished wood walls at Fairchild and Lawson, the law firm in Manhattan that Rowan recommended. Beyond the large windows, the city glowed in the winter sun, which bounced off skyscrapers like broken glass. The tension inside the room was so thick you could feel it. Her lawyer, Mara Lawson, pushed a pile of papers across the table. "Harper, we are not just building a custody case," Mara explained. "This is a complete protection plan for you and the children." Harper gave a small nod, her fingertips grazing the papers. "And what about Elena? And my father?" "We are filing for restraining orders this afternoon," Mara said, "and a criminal complaint for trying to interfere with medical care." She tapped the folder. "The technician's statement gives law enforcement enough to connect the money to Elena, and likely to your father as well." The very idea made Harper's chest feel tight. She had worked for years to keep her history from poisoning her future. But that history was now breaking down her door. Making demands she would never meet, Mara went on. "We also have the issue of Cole. His lawyer delivered a letter just this morning to challenge the D&L results and demand visitation with the triplets." Harper went rigid. "He walked out on us. He denied they were his children in front of people." Mara offered a cold smile. "And I am going to destroy him with that fact. The parental refusal form he signed is a legal disaster for him. Combine that with Verena's lies, his attempt to enter the NICU, and his recent removal from Maddox Financial, the man has no chance of winning anything." Harper felt a strange mix of comfort and sadness. She had once hoped Cole would be a father to their children, not use them as weapons. But hope does not change reality. Mara turned to a new page. "Now, regarding your father, I have something for you to see." She passed Harper a printed file, a hospital record that Rowan's contacts had put together overnight. Harper looked confused. "What's this?" "It is about his health," Mara said gently, "and there is something else." Harper read through the pages, and every sentence was a new blow. Genetic marrow failure. Progressive. Prognosis grim. Then her gaze landed on the line that made her blood run cold. Possible candidate for an experimental procedure. Pending family match confirmation. Her hand started to shake. "So, he really is dying?" "Yes," Mara confirmed in a soft voice. "And he thinks that getting to your children is his only hope." Harper shut her eyes, fighting back the pain that was rising in her throat. She was not cruel or out for revenge, but to save the man who never saved her by sacrificing the children he cast aside? No, that was not going to happen. Mara leaned in. "Harper, we found one more thing. Something connected to Elena." Harper looked up, surprised. "What is it?" "She is not only your father's wife," Mara said. "She is also his financial guardian. That means if he passes away before he gets the treatment, she will inherit everything." Harper just stared. Everything? All of his assets, all of his investments, and every single property. And if he survives? Mara's expression hardened. She walks away with nothing. The realization struck Harper like a bolt of lightning. Elena was not trying to save her husband's life. She was trying to protect her inheritance. Just then, Rowan appeared at the door, looking a little out of breath. "Harper," he said, with urgency, "we have new information." Security found another camera angle. Harper's heart began to race. "Is it about Elena?" Rowan shook his head. "No, it is about your father." Mara looked concerned. "What about him?" Rowan entered the room and shut the door. Patrick was not alone. When he came to the hospital, he explained, he had an accomplice. Harper felt the air catch in her throat. Who helped him? Rowan paused for a moment before answering. Cole. Harper's entire world shifted, and she knew instantly that the two men who had once thrown her away were now working together against her. Harper felt like all the air had been knocked out of her. Cole, the man who had promised her a future, was now in league with the father who had left her behind. It seemed unbelievable, but a sick feeling deep inside told her it was a twisted kind of truth. They were two men obsessed with control, both unnerved by her newfound strength, both terrified by the results of their own choices. Rowan moved closer and laid security photos on the table. This was captured 2 hours before Patrick tried to get into the NICU. There he is, and there is Cole giving him an envelope. Harper looked at the blurry picture. Cole's face was a mask of fury. His jaw clenched, and his body was rigid. Patrick appeared ill and desperate, but also resolute. The envelope that passed between them seemed to be a physical token of their betrayal. "What is in it?" she whispered. "Money," Rowan answered, and a set of instructions. "Your father's task was to get a DNA sample from one of the babies to support Cole's new custody challenge." Harper's breath caught in her throat. "He helped Patrick just to get access to my children?" Mara, her lawyer, nodded with a grim expression. "That matches Cole's most recent legal motion. He is now alleging that you pressured Rowan to forge the guardianship documents. He is trying to paint a picture of you as unstable and spiteful, and not acting in the children's best interests." Harper wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "After all he put us through, now he wants to be the victim?" Mara sat back in her chair. Men in desperate situations will rewrite any story to save themselves. But Rowan was not amused at all. His eyes were filled with a protective fire that was much more than professional duty. "He is not going anywhere near those kids," Rowan declared. "Not now, and not ever. But we have to make the first move, both in court and publicly." Harper sat up straighter. "What do I need to do?" "Your side of the story," Mara answered. "Every single detail, every threat, every time he abandoned you. The judge needs to understand the entire history." For the very first time, Harper did not feel any shame. She felt a different emotion, strength. She told them everything, her voice strong and clear, the memories no longer like chains, but like pieces of evidence. Rowan stayed by her side the entire time, quiet but solid, his presence a steadying force. When she was done, Mara shut her notebook. "Excellent. We will file for a restraining order against Cole in the next hour, and we are also asking for emergency custody orders. Given the proof we now have, the judge will almost certainly side with you." Harper let out a shaky breath. Relief was mixed with a new kind of fear, the type you feel when another storm is gathering on the horizon. Rowan looked at her. "There is something else." Her stomach dropped. "I am not sure I can handle anything else." "Yes, you can," he said gently. "You already have." He put another paper down in front of her, which was an internal hospital memo. Harper's brow furrowed. "What am I supposed to be seeing?" "It is a complaint," Rowan explained, "that Cole filed against me." Harper's heart skipped a beat. "He is accusing me of having an inappropriate relationship with a patient with you." Harper jumped out of her seat. "What? That is not true." Rowan nodded. "I know it is not, but if the board believes him, I will lose my medical license, and he is counting on that. He wants to push me out of the picture so that you are all alone again." Harper's hands tightened into fists. "I am not going to let that happen. I refuse to lose the only person who is truly on our side." Rowan's expression softened, showing a brief glimpse of vulnerability. "We will handle this, the two of us." Mara glanced between them, then put the new file on the table. "This is how we fight back. And when we file it, Cole will have nowhere left to go." Harper gave a firm nod, preparing for the worst. But Mara's phone buzzed hard against the table before she could say more. Her friend looked at the screen, and all the color left her face. "What is it?" Harper whispered. Mara met her gaze, her voice laced with fear. "The judge is demanding an emergency hearing right now." Rowan went rigid. "When?" "Now," Mara repeated. "As in 30 minutes." Harper's heart hammered against her ribs. Her children's future was on the line, and Cole was already there, waiting. The courthouse had the faint scent of old documents and cold air when she arrived, every fiber of her being on high alert. With Rowan on one side and Mara on the other, their determined procession made people look twice. Her hands were clammy, and her stomach was in knots, but she held her head high. She refused to walk in as a victim. She was there as a mother. Cole was already in the courtroom, sitting next to his lawyer with a confident air. That smug look she knew so well was plastered on his face. He was dressed for the part in a sharp navy suit and silver tie, his hair perfectly combed. He carried himself like someone who thought he could manipulate a judge as easily as he handled investors. But when Harper walked in, his composure wavered. It was not guilt in his eyes, but fear. He could see she was different now, stronger, and no longer willing to be small. Harper ignored him completely. She sat with Mara, while Rowan stood behind them, a silent guardian. The stern, silver-haired judge entered, quieting the room with a single look. "This emergency hearing is being held," she announced, "to discuss 3 issues: temporary custody of the children, accusations of misconduct against Dr. Rowan Hale, and the safety of the newborns in the neonatal intensive care unit." 3 fights in one room. Harper's pulse raced. Cole's lawyer was the first to stand. "Your Honor, my client has been unjustly blocked from seeing his children. Miss Sullivan and Dr. Hale plotted together to strip him of his legal guardianship. Their scheme was a calculated effort to terminate his rights as a father." Rowan's jaw clenched. The lawyer pressed on. "Additionally, we suspect Dr. Hale formed an improper emotional connection with a highly vulnerable patient." Mara shot to her feet so fast her chair screeched. "Objection. We have proof that Mr. Maddox created false stories to cover up his own neglect and deliberate abandonment." She presented a binder so thick it made the judge lift a brow. It contained a copy of the parental rights waiver Cole had signed, statements from several hospital employees, video of him screaming in the neonatal unit hallway, and Verena's confession linking him to the tampered medical files. The judge leafed through the pages, her expression turning stony. "Mr. Maddox, is this your signature on this waiver?" Cole swallowed hard. I was manipulated." "That was not the question." "Yes," he mumbled. "And you consciously left the hospital while your partner was in high-risk labor?" "I did not believe the children were mine." "That is no excuse for abandoning them," the judge retorted sharply. Harper felt Rowan's comforting hand rest on her chair. She did not turn, but his touch helped steady her ragged breathing. Mara then moved forward once more. "Your Honor, we also have proof that Mr. Maddox recently conspired with Patrick Sullivan, who is currently facing a restraining order to unlawfully get DNA samples from the neonatal ward. Their plot almost caused serious harm to a baby." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Cole's face went crimson. "That is a lie." Rowan presented the security images. "This picture was taken 3 hours before someone tried to break in." Cole's lawyer jumped up to object, but the judge raised her hand firmly. "Sit down, immediately." Cole dropped back into his seat, radiating pure anger. The judge leaned in. "Given this information, Miss Sullivan will retain temporary full custody. Mr. Maddox is denied all visitation, pending a thorough investigation." Harper exhaled in a wave of relief, a mix of justice and shock. But the judge had more to say. "Regarding the accusations against Dr. Hale," she said, looking at Rowan, "this court sees no basis for misconduct. In reality, his swift thinking probably saved Miss Astrid Sullivan's life." Rowan let out a long breath as the stress left his body. But then the judge got to the last page in the binder, her brow furrowed in concern. This is disturbing, she said quietly. Harper froze. What is it? The judge's gaze was piercing. Miss Sullivan, did you know that your father submitted a petition right before this hearing? The blood in Harper's veins ran cold. He is trying to get emergency guardianship. Rowan took a step forward. Your Honor, that man is... The judge held up her hand. I have not made a decision, but the petition contains a sworn affidavit making claims against Miss Sullivan. Harper's pulse hammered. Claims? The judge shut the folder. And the witness providing support for it is someone you are familiar with. Harper's breathing became shaky. Mr. Maddox? Isham Blesnibrsix, the judge commanded. Please approach. Cole got up, slowly, like he was being forced to stand. For the first time all day, he did not look angry or smug, but completely unnerved. Harper saw him walk toward the stand, her heart pounding. No matter what he had done, she felt the room getting smaller around her. The judge repositioned her glasses. Mr. Maddox, you provided a sworn statement to support Patrick Sullivan's request for guardianship. Is that correct? Cole cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. Mara's jaw set. And in that statement, the judge went on, you called Miss Sullivan emotionally unstable, reckless, and not fit for parental judgment. Harper winced at the accusation, but kept her expression neutral. Cole quickly added, Your Honor, I was worried about the babies. She would not let me see them. Because you signed away your legal rights, the judge shot back. Cole stumbled over his words. Rowan looked like he was about to jump over the furniture. Mara stepped up. Your Honor, we would like to cross-examine the witness. Proceed, the judge allowed. Mara moved toward Cole with a calm, deliberate pace. Mr. Maddox, you say Harper is unstable. On what grounds? Cole paused. She passed out while giving birth. From losing blood, Mara interrupted. From a high-risk pregnancy, not from a mental issue. Cole's jaw tightened. She made bad decisions. Like what? She waited until after the second ultrasound to tell me about the triplets. Scan. Harper shut her eyes, a fresh wave of hurt washing over her. She had waited to be sure they were viable before he could destroy her joy. Mara's tone grew sharper. And yet you told the ambulance crew she was not your wife, just some random woman trying to trap you. Are you denying you said that? All the color drained from Cole's face. A low buzz of conversation filled the courtroom. The judge scowled. Is this accurate? Cole stammered. I was given false information. Verena told me that. Yes, Mara said dryly. Verena Lowe, who is being investigated for falsifying records and medical fraud. Cole gulped. And Patrick Sullivan, Mara continued, facing the judge, a man who deserted his own child, used a stolen identity in a hospital, and tried to break into secure areas. This is the person Mr. Maddox thinks should be a guardian. The judge's face grew stern. Mr. Maddox, do you realize how bad this makes you look? Cole suddenly stood tall, his desperation shifting to rage. I was used, he yelled. Harper deceived me for years. She knew I was sterile. That is not true, Rowan stated, his voice tight with anger. Your fertility was fine. Someone changed the file. The judge shot him a look. Mr. Maddox, come to the bench. Cole shuffled forward. The judge's voice dropped so only those nearby could hear, but the tension was thick. You deserted your wife during a dangerous delivery. You tried to force your way into a secure neonatal unit. You worked with a man being investigated by police, and you continued to try and take infants from their mother. Her voice became razor sharp. Your credibility is zero. Cole's eyes grew wide as pure panic finally shattered his confidence. The judge spoke louder for the court record. I am launching a complete criminal investigation into your conduct and your association with Patrick Sullivan. The entire room gasped. Harper finally took a slow, deep breath. Cole collapsed back into his seat, his hands shaking. The judge looked at the documents again. This petition from Patrick Sullivan is built on falsified information, unfounded claims, and lies about neglect. It is therefore... The courtroom doors flew open before she could rule. A bailiff rushed to the judge, whispering quickly in her ear. Her face changed from confused to alarmed. She stood. Miss Sullivan, Dr. Hale, you must come with me right now. Harper's heart leaped into her throat. What is going on? The judge met her eyes, her voice deadly serious. It is about the babies. Rowan's hand tightened on Harper's chair. The judge added, they have vanished from the neonatal unit. Harper had no memory of getting to the hospital. One second she was looking at the judge's colorless face, and the next, she was running down hospital hallways, her breathing torn and uneven. She was moving on pure adrenaline, outpacing her own terror, even outpacing Rowan, who was calling her name right behind her. Her babies were gone, taken, disappeared from the most secure unit in the hospital. Alarms were screaming above them as red emergency lights flashed everywhere. Staff ran by in a state of shock and panic. Shouts echoed all around. Secure the exits. Shut down the elevators. Nobody in or out. Leaves without being cleared. Harper's heart pounded violently, threatening to break apart. This is not real, she whispered. Not my children. Not again. Rowan grabbed her shoulders, pulling her focus. Harper, listen. They are alive. If the goal was to harm them, it would have happened here. We will find them. But a slight quiver in his voice scared her more than anything. The head nurse approached, a tablet shaking in her grip. We checked the video. A person in a complete surgical outfit took the triplets. Could you see who it was? Rowan demanded. No, but we saw them go down 3 hallways, and then the video died. Died? Harper asked, her voice cracking. What do you mean? They were manually disabled. Under his breath, Rowan swore. Harper pushed her hands against her head, trying to breathe. Who could be behind this? Cole is at his hearing. Verena is locked up. And Elena was just thrown out. The nurse paused. We discovered this inside one of the cribs. She offered Harper a piece of folded paper. A chill washed over Harper as she read the words. If you want them back, come alone. That was it. No name, no details, only a menacing command. Rowan snatched the paper, his jaw tight. It is a setup. You are not going by yourself. Before she could argue, a security radio nearby buzzed to life. Suspect spotted in the northwest wing. Has 2 baby carriers, heading to the service dock. Harper's breath caught. The old part of the hospital. It is almost abandoned. Rowan swore. It also has unguarded exits. They took off, moving faster than seemed possible after giving birth, driven by pure instinct and terror. Down the hall, they burst through a set of doors into a long, quiet hallway. The overhead lights blinked erratically, casting strange shadows. A security officer ran up to them as they neared the end. Dr. Hale, Ms. Sullivan, we have the 3rd baby carrier. It was by the maintenance room, completely empty. Harper felt her legs give way. Empty? Where is my child? Footprints go out to the service alley, the officer explained. Harper pushed by him, throwing open the exit and rushing into the frigid night. Her breath fogged in the air before she stopped dead. In the alley, an engine ignited. It was a black SUV with its back doors wide open, and inside were 2 baby carriers. Rowan shouted, "Harper, do not move!" But she lurched ahead, crying out, My babies! The vehicle's brights flashed on, and a figure inside shifted to face her. The shape of the man, the wide shoulders, was a shape that stole the air from her lungs. Her father. Patrick Sullivan. He was clutching a carrier, his eyes empty and frantic. But the person behind the wheel was the real shock, the one who made Rowan swear. Cole. His gaze met Harper's, his face a mask of desperation and resolve. "Harper," he yelled above the roar of the engine. "We are getting them to safety. Away from her." Harper surged toward the car. Rowan caught her arm, holding her back. The SUV peeled out in reverse with a scream of tires. Just then, another person emerged from the darkness behind the vehicle, lifting a gun. For a single moment, everything went silent as the world waited. Harper was paralyzed. Rowan pulled her behind him just as the alley exploded with the sound of a gunshot. The bullet hit the ground, missing the rear tire by inches. Harper cried out in terror. Patrick scrambled into the SUV. Cole floored the gas pedal, but the gunman was not trying to hit Harper or the infants. The target was the tires. Just then, security officers stormed out from the loading bay, alerted by the gunfire. The SUV swerved wildly on shredded rubber before smashing hard against a guardrail. The doors flew open. Patrick fell out, still holding the baby carrier tightly. On the other side, a stunned Cole scrambled out, trying to get to the second carrier. "Give me back my babies," Harper yelled, running as Rowan and the guards came right behind her. But Patrick did not run. He just fell to his knees, not out of panic, but from sheer fatigue. His breathing was weak and ragged, his skin pale. With shaking arms, he offered her the carrier. "Take him, Harper," he pleaded softly, "please." She stopped right before him. For once, the look in his eyes held no manipulation. It was not selfish. It was genuine. She carefully took the carrier from him. Patrick lowered his head. "I just needed more time. I really believed I could repair the damage I had done." Harper fought back the lump in her throat. "Hurting my babies does not fix anything," Patrick nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I know. I am sorry for everything." The guards helped him up as he surrendered quietly. His last words were a faint whisper. "You are so much stronger than I ever deserved." Meanwhile, Cole tried to make a run for it, clutching one of his own children. Rowan dove, tackling him before he could leave the alley. The baby carrier landed safely near Harper as security piled on Cole. "You are done," Rowan growled. "It is over." Cole fought back, yelling, "She took it all from me. She poisoned my life." But nobody was listening. They all saw the truth now. He was arrested right there, on charges of kidnapping, conspiracy, and child endangerment. Harper stood trembling in the sharp, cold air, holding two carriers tightly, her heart finally calm. A nurse appeared moments later with the third baby, whom she had rushed to a safe place when the chaos began. All three of her children were alive, unharmed, and breathing. The realization hit her, and she collapsed to her knees, overcome with tears of relief. Rowan knelt with her, wrapping his arms around her and resting his forehead on hers. "You did it," he said softly. "You kept them safe. You won." Harper met his eyes, and for the first time, she did not see her doctor or her protector. She saw the man who had been her rock through every storm. A few days later, in the quiet of a courtroom, a judge awarded Harper sole and permanent custody. Cole's parental rights were officially revoked. Patrick gave up all legal claims to the children on his own and left to deal with his choices and his health. Elena was formally charged as a conspirator. Verena was awaiting her sentence for her medical crimes. Justice was served. Time moved on, and spring came to New York City, bathing everything in warm light. Harper was walking through Central Park with a stroller for three, a gentle breeze on her face. Her babies were sound asleep in their soft blankets. Rowan was next to her, holding her hand. It was not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "Harper," he said quietly, pausing by a blooming cherry tree. "I am not trying to be a replacement for anything. I just want to be part of your future." Her heart felt full. She moved towards him, warm tears on her cool cheeks. "Rowan, I want that too." Beneath the blooming spring flowers, they kissed. They were not a savior and a victim anymore. They were two survivors who had found their way through the dark together. She was no longer haunted by her past or scared of her future. Her true family was standing right here with her, and for the very first time, Harper Sullivan was complete. And so Harper Sullivan stood beneath the cherry blossoms in Central Park, her three babies sleeping peacefully, and the man who never stopped showing up walking beside her. Not because the world suddenly became fair, not because karma arrived on schedule, but because she made a decision that changed everything. She decided she was done being small. Let us talk about what this story really means, because it is not just a drama. It is a mirror. Harper spent most of her life believing that safety meant invisibility. She grew up watching her mother work herself to the bone, while her father drank away every promise he ever made. She learned, the way so many of us do, that if you stay quiet, if you do not ask for too much, if you make yourself easy to overlook, then maybe the world will leave you alone. And for a while, it worked. She got through school. She became a nurse. She found meaning in holding the hands of babies who had no one else. But here's the trap that nobody warns you about. When you build your entire life around being invisible, you attract people who need you to stay that way. Cole did not fall in love with Harper because of her light. He fell in love with her willingness to dim it. And the moment she carried three miracles inside her body, the moment her existence demanded to be seen, he could not handle it. Because controlling someone who is becoming powerful requires a different kind of cruelty, and Cole was willing to go there. This is the first lesson. Pay attention to who celebrates your growth and who is threatened by it. The people who love you will never ask you to shrink. If someone needs you to be less so, they can feel like more. That is not love. That is captivity dressed in a wedding ring. Now let us talk about Verena, because she represents something we do not discuss enough. Verena was not a stranger who stumbled into Harper's life by accident. She was someone who had been watching, waiting, and planning for years. She knew Cole's medical history. She forged documents. She planted doubt like seeds in poisoned soil and waited for the harvest. Verena is a reminder that not every enemy announces themselves. Some of them smile at you, shake your hand, and quietly set fire to the foundation of your life while you are busy trying to hold the roof up. The second lesson is this: trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you cannot prove it yet. Harper felt Verena's coldness from the very first handshake. She noticed the dismissive glance, the too perfect composure. But she did what so many of us do. She told herself she was imagining things. She gave the benefit of the doubt to someone who deserved none of it. Your gut knows things before your brain catches up. Listen to it. And then there is Patrick, her father, a man who vanished when she was 13 and reappeared 15 years later. Not with an apology, but with a demand. He did not come back because he missed her. He came back because he needed something from her children, and he brought Elena, a woman whose only interest in keeping Patrick alive was protecting her own inheritance. This is perhaps the most painful part of the story, and it carries the third lesson. Some people will only come back into your life when they need something from you. That is not reconciliation. That is exploitation wearing the mask of family. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to close a door that someone else walked out of. even if they are your own blood. Forgiveness does not require you to hand over your boundaries. But the heart of this story, the real turning point, was not the courtroom victory or Cole losing his company or the restraining orders. It was the morning Harper looked in that mirror. She expected to see a broken woman. Instead, she saw her mother's fighting spirit staring back at her. That was the moment everything changed, not externally, but internally. She stopped waiting for someone to rescue her. She stopped hoping Cole would change. She stopped trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. And that is the fourth and most important lesson of all. You do not need to wait for the world to be fair before you start living. You do not need permission to be strong. You do not need someone else to validate your worth before you claim it. Harper had Rowan. Yes, she had Mara, she had Priya, she had people who showed up for her. But the decision to fight, that came from within. Nobody handed her that. She built it from the ruins of everything that tried to destroy her. Rowan did not save Harper. Let me be clear about that. He gave her resources, he gave her protection, he gave her steadiness when the ground was shaking. But Harper saved herself. She walked into that boardroom and laid the truth on a table surrounded by men in expensive suits. She stood in a courtroom and refused to be painted as unstable by the very man who made her world unstable. She ran down a hospital corridor after her stolen children, with stitches still healing in her body. That is not a woman who was rescued. That is a woman who rose. So if you are listening to this right now and you are in the middle of your own storm, if someone has made you feel small, if someone has lied about who you are, if someone has taken credit for your pain and called it your fault, hear me clearly. You are not what they did to you. You are what you did after. Harper Sullivan started her life trying to be invisible. She ended it standing in the sunlight, surrounded by the family she built with her own hands, walking beside a man who never once asked her to be less than she was. That is not a fairy tale. That is what happens when you stop apologizing for taking up space. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and emotional value to our audience. All characters and events are fictional and created for entertainment and inspirational purposes. Any resemblance to real persons or actual events is entirely coincidental. We do not condone or promote any form of abuse, manipulation, or illegal activity depicted in this story. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse or emotional manipulation, please reach out to a qualified professional or local support organization. Thank you for watching, and remember, your story matters too.